Good morning. My name is David Chase. I'm pleased to participate in this virtual reunion at Phillips Academy. Our subject is Andover in the Civil War. Ramifications of the war remain with us. If the Revolution forged a nation, the Civil War was the anvil upon which our modern state took shape. An estimated 750,000 Americans died in the Civil War, more than in every other American conflict combined. The Civil War is endlessly studied, yet the part played by Andover alumni and students remains unknown and uncelebrated. To redress that omission, new research has revealed that more than 800 alumni and students fought in the Civil War. More than 100 died defending the Union. Documented stories one may now relate of Andover Civil War combatants and others involved in the war effort are varied and fascinating and, in my view, merit the telling. Consider William Herbert Withington, class of 1850. He commissioned this monument. Titled Defense of the Flag, it stands in Jackson, Michigan. Withington was 21 when he enlisted. He received the Medal of Honor for extraordinary bravery during the First Battle of Bull Run. After the war, Withington became a manufacturer. Financial success made possible this gift honoring his comrades. The monument's inscription reads, "To the soldiers and sailors of Jackson County, erected as a tribute by one of their companions in arms." William Withington insisted his own name not appear on the monument. Consider now a very different flag image. Following Gettysburg in July 1863, Chaplain Thomas Murphy, class of 1834, observed his Delaware regiment's first post-battle inspection. It was a sorry sight. One sergeant led a solitary man, Murphy recalled, the only one of his company present. All told, there were fewer than 100 men. Thank God we still had our colors, but oh, how changed. Just 1 year before, they were new and beautiful. Now, soiled and tattered, our flags drooped as if in mourning for the brave men who had fallen in their defense. That moment prompted Chaplain Murphy to record his Civil War experiences. Such incandescent moments illuminate the collective history of Andover alumni during that nation-searing and shaping war. What brought on this greatest crisis in American history? Fundamentally, it was the issue of slavery. Southerners wanted slavery protected and extended. Northerners wanted it contained and eventually terminated. A small but unrelenting northern minority advocated immediate abolition. The centrality of slavery to the Southern cause was stated with brutal frankness by Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens. "The cornerstone of our new government," Stephens declared, "rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery is his natural and normal condition. Our new government is the first in history based upon this great truth." So said Alexander Stephens. The great truth is, slavery has a complex relationship to this academy, starting with slave-holding members of the Phillips family itself. Yet, founding Phillips Academy trustee John Lowe took the lead in ending slavery in Massachusetts In 1780, it was Lowe, a legislative colleague and good friend of Academy founder Samuel Phillips Jr. It was Lowe who insisted the new Massachusetts Constitution state the following: all men are born free and equal, and have certain natural, essential, and inalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberties. In a talk devoted to Andover in the Civil War, I'm afraid I cannot address the connections between PA and slavery at length, as this subject requires. Suffice it to say now that in the late 18th and 19th centuries, a legion of Andover students and alumni engaged the moral and legal, religious, social, and economic ramifications of slavery. Student agitation for abolition led in 1835 to what became known as Andover's anti-slavery rebellion. The faculty prohibited the students from forming an anti-slavery society. The students protested. One student was expelled, 40 students quit Andover in protest. Among those who left in protest was Horace Eaton. Looking back decades later, Eaton wrote, in the summer of 1835, the Cotton King stretched out his scepter over Phillips Academy with the edict, silence. But the logic of events has vindicated those who took a stand rather than the subservient. Eaton became a minister. During the 1840s and 50s, Reverend Eaton hid slaves escaping to Canada in the belfry of his church. Opposition to slavery grew in the North during the 1850s, largely in response to new federal legislation further protecting the interests of slaveholders and extending slavery in the West. At Andover, abolitionism again became prevalent. The student literary magazine, The Mirror, published anti-slavery poems, essays, and editorials. One 1857 poem began, "No longer from the hills of Maine to blue Pacific's waves be heard the clank of slavery's chains, or seen the toil of slaves. Americans, the day, the hour is nigh, when cries the voice of God, march on to do or die." Student interest in the presidential election of 1860 was keen. Lincoln was Andover students' overwhelming favorite. His election on November 6th was greeted with a grand illumination, 1,600 candles, backlit banners covering the windows of Foxcroft and Bartlett Halls, spelling out Veritas Vincit and Lincoln and Hamlin. Well, South Carolina seceded on December 20th. 6 states joined South Carolina, forming the Confederacy in February 1861, a month before Lincoln took office. And those states proceeded to seize federal property, including arms, fortifications, and naval bases. In Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter's commander refused to surrender. South Carolina troops opened fire on April 12th. Sumter was evacuated on the 14th. The war was on. At Andover, students mobilized, forming the Ellsworth Guards, shown here in parade on the Great Lawn in 1861. Andover students and alumni went to war, the vast majority on the Union side, a few with the Confederacy. In the main, this reflected home state allegiance. Of 6,000 plus students attending Andover between 1830 and the early 1860s, About 5,900 were from what became Union states, 100 from what became Confederate states. Almost all the Southern students were from wealthy slave-owning families. Case in point, Nathan Campbell Napier, class of 1851, one of 6 Georgia brothers who attended antebellum Andover. In 1860, N.C. Napier owned 132 slaves, and his brothers hundreds more. By contrast, students from northern states represented a broad socioeconomic spectrum from affluence to poverty. In the words of Horace Eaton, Phillips Academy has ever been the poor boy's friend. Eaton was a hardscrabble farmer's son. He walked 75 miles from Sutton, New Hampshire to enroll at Andover. The remarkable number of poor but enterprising students at Andover in this period also reflected the fact that from 1830 through the 1860s, there was not just one academy on campus, but 2, the original college preparatory school teaching the classics and the English Academy and Teachers Seminary. The latter offered a broad and flexible and very modern curriculum designed to train teachers and, according to the catalog, practical men for all the departments of common life: farmers, tradesmen, mechanics, merchants, and young men intent on entering technical professions like medicine or engineering. This history, geographic, economic, institutional, shaped how Andover students and alumni went to war. Of course, not every story is clear-cut. William Henry Chase, who hailed from Maine, was a member of the PA class of 1812. Trained as a military engineer at West Point, Lieutenant Chase was posted to the Gulf Coast in 1819. By the 1830s, Captain Chase had charge of all US military construction along the Gulf. The largest of these projects was Fort Pickens, commanding the entrance to Pensacola Bay, the finest harbor on Florida's west coast, and the site of an important naval base. Erected under Chase's supervision from 1828 to 1834, Fort Pickens mounted 252 cannon. In 1856, Major Chase was offered a promotion, superintendency of West Point, but he didn't wish to leave the Gulf. He had married into a Louisiana planter family and had enticing prospects. Chase resigned his Army commission, devoting himself to managing his wife's family's plantations and serving as president of the Alabama and Florida Railroad. For all his Southern buy-in, however, when rebellion came, Chase's loyalties proved to be divided. On January 10, 1861, Florida seceded. Pensacola's 80 federal troops, just 80, secured themselves in Fort Pickens. Florida's governor ordered Militia Colonel Chase to seize the fort. On the 15th, Chase parleyed with the fort's young commander, Lieutenant A.J. Slemmer. They met under a flag of truce outside the walls. Colonel Chase, who commanded 900 militiamen, attempted to read aloud the governor's confiscation order, voice shaking, tears falling. He was unable to proceed. It had to be read by Slemmer's second in command. Slemmer would not surrender. Colonel Chase would not order an attack. Fort Pickens would remain a Union stronghold throughout the war. Strategically important Pensacola neutralized. William Henry Chase resigned his Florida militia commission, declined to serve in the Confederate Army, retired from business, and sat out the war. Albert Claudius Claude Gibson, class of 1854, harbored no doubts about the Confederate cause. Raised at Live Oak Plantation in Terrebonne Parish, deep in sugarcane country, southwest of New Orleans, he came to study at Andover. Gibson's planter father held nearly 200 slaves, yet the Gibson family harbored a remarkable secret. The founder of the family fortune was Black. Claude Gibson, intellectual, handsome, a bon vivant, a wastrel in the eyes of his father, young Gibson was slowly dying of tuberculosis. From Andover, he enrolled at Yale. He dropped out, then headed to Europe. But when Louisiana seceded, Gibson immediately sailed home, joining the Provisional Army of the Confederate States. But it turned out Gibson had no talent for things military. He quarreled with his men and with his superiors. Health failing, Claude Gibson resigned his commission. He died of TB at New Orleans in 1863. Claude was a noble fellow, wrote a Yale classmate 2 years later. Of decided talent, a fluent writer, a graceful speaker, elegant in appearance and manners, of great pride and as much diffidence. He was a thorough aristocrat in sentiment, a great admirer and violent defender of his native South, and with it had the usual accompaniments, great generosity and a hasty temper. Gibson's Andover classmate, William Francis Bartlett, became a Union Civil War hero. He looked and acted the part. All but forgotten today, Bartlett should be counted among Andover's once most celebrated 19th century alumni. Bartlett left Harvard to join up, becoming a captain in the 20th Massachusetts Infantry. Severely wounded, his left leg had to be amputated. While recuperating, Bartlett completed his Harvard studies, then re-upped as a colonel. Wounded twice more and taken prisoner, Bartlett was exchanged, returning to service once more, now as a general. Mustered out in 1866, that same year, Herman Melville's tribute to Bartlett appeared. It begins. He rides at their head. A crutch by his saddle just slants in view. One slung arm is in splints, you see. Yet he guides his strong steed, how coldly, too. He brings his regiment home. Before his death in 1876, General Bartlett gained renown as an advocate for reconciliation between North and South. One now asks, at what cost? A memorial poem by Whittier appeared in 1878, a memorial biography in 1879, and then this commanding bronze statue portraying William Francis Bartlett. It still occupies a place of honor in the Massachusetts State House. Sarah Lowe, Abbott Academy class of 1846, was a Union Army nurse in Washington at a 1,000-bed temporary hospital built on the Mall. Her letters home recount life and death on her ward. Nearly opposite lies a man who will die tonight, she wrote home. He was brought in 2 or 3 weeks ago, wounded through the lungs. In the bed next to him is my rebel. He groans a great deal about his stump. Her patients presented Nurse Lowe with this album, an autograph album, which they signed, in gratitude for her care. After the war, Sarah Lowe settled in Andover, becoming renowned for her tales of Civil War times, told and retold and retold. Before the war, William Randall captained New Bedford whalers. He volunteered for service in 1861, becoming second in command aboard USS Cumberland, a 50-gun, square-rigged, oak-hulled heavy frigate, a formidable battle wagon of former days. On March 8, 1862, the Cumberland was attacked in Hampton Roads by the Confederate steam-powered ironclad ram Virginia. It was no contest. Sinking of the Cumberland signaled the end for wind-powered timber warships and launched William Randall's fame. Northern writers celebrated his heroics during the Cumberland's final minutes afloat. George Henry Baker described Cumberland's crew scrambling to abandon ship while Randall fought on. We reached the deck. Here Randall stood. Another turn, men, so. Calmly he aimed his pivot gun. Now, Tenny, let her go. It did our sore hearts good to hear the song our pivot sang as, rushing on, from wave to wave, the whirring bombshell sprang. Brave Randall leapt upon the gun and waved his cap in sport. Well done, well aimed. I saw the shell go through their open port. Following William Randall's death in 1904, laudatory obituaries recalling his Civil War gallantry appeared in papers across the nation. Well, not every soldier was a hero. Not every soldier was celebrated in the press. Moses Eaton, a member of PA's English Academy class of 1831, was a shoemaker. He was 46 when he enlisted, practicing his trade down the road from Andover in Reading. Private Eaton, Company D, 50th Massachusetts Infantry, died of malaria at a quarantine hospital on the Mississippi in February 1863. A fellow infantryman recorded Eaton's funeral. A cloud is cast over us today by the death of Moses Eaton of Company D, who died in the hospital after an illness of 7 days. The 3 companies followed his body to the grave, the fife major playing a funeral dirge. After the burial, the men marched back to the tune of Yankee Doodle, for such is the military regulation, perhaps on the whole a wise one, although it seems almost heartless. Lucian Holmes, class of 1861, was one of 8 alumni who died in Confederate POW camps. This is his cenotaph in Bennington, New Hampshire. His body was never recovered. Holmes was among more than 3,000 Union soldiers who perished in North Carolina's Salisbury prison camp and were buried in unmarked mass graves. Mustered in as a corporal in August 1862, Holmes was captured during the Battle of Fair Oaks in October 1864. Holmes kept a diary. Salisbury Prison, November 9, 1864. It rained all last night. We had to lie in the mud. We drew for 100 men, 2 tents, a pint of meal per man, no salt. I wish I could get word home. November 21, still raining. This yard is worse than any hog pen. We get just enough to eat to live. November 24. I suppose this is Thanksgiving in New Hampshire. Today they gave us only quarter rations. God only knows what is to become of us here. Yet we must hope for the best. November 25. Only quarter rations again today. Men dying fast. November 29, I never felt so weak as I have today. That was Lucian Holmes' last diary entry. He died of starvation 6 weeks later, 3 months before the end of the war. When Lucian Holmes died, there were already veterans attending Andover. Levitt Bradley enrolled at PA as a 21-year-old junior. He had been 15 when he joined the Army, assigned as company clerk to the 1st Massachusetts Heavy Artillery. Like most soldiers, he wrote home. March 23, 1862, Fort Albany, Virginia. The weather has been rather better for the week past, Levitt reported. We are having fine times after supper in games, football, baseball, cards, checkers, dancing and singing. July 2, 1862, Fort Barnard, Virginia. Levitt has just turned 16. I have got acquainted with a farmer's son who lives about a quarter mile from here. He, of course, knows the girls. I ate supper with them the other night. So you see, I'm all hunk. Got to get acquainted with some rich young lady, marry and settle down. I suppose you think I'm going to work rather early. Well, we are soldiers. August 7, 1862, following a military review attended by President Lincoln. Levitt wrote, Lincoln had an Old Testament look in his face. Mother said she did not care for long letters, so I will close. July 11, 1863, following Gettysburg, when many men in Bradley's artillery unit had been sent into battle as foot soldiers to fill in depleted ranks. One company went in with 33 men. 27 were shot dead on the spot. It's awful to think of. After re-enlisting in 1864 as an infantryman, Bradley ruminated on the fate of Union captives confined in the Confederate POW camp at Andersonville. Some of the boys heard by letter of the fellows who died in the bullpens of Virginia. Think of being penned up, dying inch by inch daily. I can assure you, I shall never be taken prisoner. Levitt Bradley never was. During 4 years in the Union Army, he was never captured, never wounded, never even taken sick. Through the murderous week-long battle of Cold Harbor, Bradley was in the thick of fighting. Unscratched after the battle, he recovered 8 spent bullets lodged in his uniform. Archie Bush, also a veteran at Andover, went to Harvard. But that hadn't been his plan. He hoped to attend Yale, and therein lies a tale. At 17, Archibald McClure Bush was commissioned first lieutenant, Company G, 95th New York Infantry. A fine officer, Bush was promoted to captain in 1864. Discharged in 1865, Bush came to Andover, not only as an Army veteran, but as a veteran of the form of baseball played in New York, core of the modern game. He was an able catcher and outstanding batter. He played professionally during school vacations for the Albany Nationals, his hometown team. With 2 other students from upstate, Bush popularized the New York game at Andover. He captained the senior team and served as class president. At 22, Archie Bush was the big man on campus. Then Archie ran afoul of Andover's irascible headmaster, Uncle Sam Taylor. Bush and a friend cut classes one spring day to catch a pro game in Boston. Incensed, Taylor expelled Bush and rescinded the letter of recommendation Bush needed to enter Yale. So Archie Bush took Harvard's entrance exam and headed to Cambridge in the fall of 1867 for the next 4 years with Bush, Harvard's star player. Harvard beat Yale. If the Civil War may be said to have begun at Andover in 1835 with the Student Anti-Slavery Rebellion, it ended in 1875 with the graduation of William Dawson, the last Civil War veteran to attend Andover. Dawson was a former slave, but he was not the first former slave to attend the academy. Madison Smith had graduated in 1873. William Dawson was born into slavery in Hillsborough, Virginia in 1850. At 12, he was conscripted into the Confederate Army as a teamster. Liberated by Union forces, classified as contraband of war, Dawson found his way north in company with Lieutenant James Brooks. Brooks took young Dawson home to Vermont. Dawson hired himself out as a farmhand and began Sabbath school, where he learned to read and write. And in 1868, when he won a prize in the Sabbath school for memorizing more Bible verses than any other pupil. Dawson came to Phillips in 1873, working his way through as gym attendant in the building we know as Bullfinch Hall. From Andover, Dawson went on to Middlebury, again working his way. At Middlebury's 1880 commencement, William Dawson delivered a well-received oration titled Hope of the Negro. Next, Dawson matriculated into BU's theology program. Ordained in 1884, William Dawson headed west, becoming a circuit-riding preacher in Kansas and Oklahoma, ministering primarily to African-American settlers. One imagines Reverend Dawson leading his frontier flock in singing the spiritual that had become the anthem of slaves like him, liberated by Union troops. Go down, Moses, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. And so, from conflicted northerner turned southerner William Chase to heroic William Francis Bartlett, from luckless prisoner of war Lucian Holmes to ever-lucky Levitt Bradley and former slave William Dawson, a sampling of Andover Civil War stories. An introduction, if you will, to the hundreds of stories that can now be told. As the historical basis for a future on-campus Civil War memorial, 850 Phillips Civil War veterans have been identified and researched. 802 fought for the Union, 48 for the Confederacy. We now know Frank Thomas was 10 when he enlisted, that William Gates was 73. We now know the class of 1859 contributed 78 alumni to the war effort, the most of any class. That 31 alumni served as Union chaplains and 45 as surgeons. That 4 Civil War alumni received the Medal of Honor. We now know Lincoln confidant Gustavus Fox played a key role in modernizing the Union Navy. That Frederick Law Olmsted led the U.S. Sanitary Commission, a privately funded soldiers' relief organization, providing Union troops everything from socks to hospital ships. We now know that the most famous wartime letter home of the Civil War was written by Sullivan Ballou, Phillips class of 1848, who was killed at Bull Run. We now know no fewer than 116 blue-clad Andover alumni died defending the Union. Voices from the Dead was the title of a sermon delivered to Union troops on March 26, 1885, in Charleston, South Carolina, where the war began almost 4 years before. Reverend Samuel Willis, chaplain of the 127th New York Infantry and an Andover alumnus, delivered that sermon. "Be faithful to every trust," Willis declared, "to the flag of our Union, now floating over the graves of our brave brothers. Be ever true." Reverend Willis had begun his homily with a biblical quote, "He being dead yet speaketh." May an Andover Civil War memorial speak for the honored dead. May it speak to those living today. May it speak to those coming to Andover in decades ahead. Thank you.